I immediately got up and was moving to the door to lock the door when the doorknob started to jiggle a little bit. He had stopped ringing the doorbell, but was still banging on the door and attempted to make entry into the apartment.
Hey gang, if you're listening to this right now, odds are you watch videos on the main channel and you've seen how important speed and accuracy are in a gunfight. That's why Active Self-Protection recommends the Range Tech Shot Timer. It's the lowest cost shot timer on the market that we're aware of, Bluetooth compatible with any Android or iOS device, native integration with Practice Score, and a visual light-based go signal. Visit them at rangetechtimer.com, rangetechtimer.com, and tell them your friends at the Active Self-Protection podcast sent you. Well, alrighty, gang. Welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. I am yet again your host, Mike Williver, and I remain your favorite former Fed. With us today, yet again, another new friend of mine. His name is Eli. Eli is in Central Mississippi. He is happily married, and he is a data administrator. Eli, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing well. So tell us, what does a data administrator do? That's one of those jobs that could mean anything. I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I work for a company that is in the right-of-way profession. We do land acquisition for public improvement projects. So we work a lot with departments of transportation. And in my role in that is I manage the documents and all of the necessary information for the land acquisition process and the acquisition of temporary easements, warranty deeds, things like that. So I've been doing that for almost a year now.
That sounds borderline like lawyerly stuff. I'm sure there's a lot of information you have to know to do that job.
Right. Yes, sir. It is. And it's really fun. And I really enjoy working with the team that I'm a part of. So they're great guys here.
Very good. We'll make sure when this comes out, make sure to send it to them.
Talk about sure thing. Absolutely.
How great they are. So talk to us about your personal history. You sent me an email and you gave me a bit of detail about the incident at hand. Prior to the incident, which I think has a ton of great lessons, by the way. Again, Eli wrote in saying, I don't know if this is worthy of a podcast. And yet again, it was. Before this incident, were you an ASP viewer? Were you an avid hunter, sportsman, shooter, self-defense, anything like that?
Yeah. So I grew up hunting as a young kid, and I've been around firearms my whole life. And I was an ASP viewer prior to this incident, so I did have some of that knowledge. Not necessarily, obviously, as much as I do now. I mean, at the time of the incident, I was 19 or 20, and I'm 24 now. So I was around firearms my whole life, and since I turned 21, I've been carrying since then. So not necessarily a whole lot of, I haven't taken a lot of courses or trainings or training classes or anything like that, but I do and go out and shoot as much as I can. And I actually went shooting this past weekend. So I try to get as much time on the range as I can. And I do a lot of dry fire practice. As you know, ammo is quite expensive these days.
Yes. So you're a CCW holder, correct, in Mississippi?
Yes, that's correct. I'm an enhanced carry holder. I think there's 2 classifications in Mississippi. I have the instructor certified certification for the state.
Very good. Can I ask what your daily carry is?
Sure, absolutely. I carry a SIG 365, just the standard. It's not the XL or anything like that, and so it's just a stock 365.
So it's a micro 9mm, right?
It is.
Yeah, those are pretty good. We have to, of course, we always plug HK here. We are HK snobs. We have the snobbery knows no bounds. It's funny. Somebody actually wrote to John not long ago. Was it an email or a comment? I can't remember. But saying, enough with all the snobbery. There's plenty of other good guns out there. And it isn't really snobbery. What it is if people can afford the best pistol made, we would like them to carry the best pistol made to protect themselves. And we happen to think that's an HK.
Sure thing.
Say what you will. But the SIG makes good. It's funny. SIG supplied my old agency with tens of thousands of pistols for duty carry. And it was the
P320?
No. We ended up with that one, but it was a P229.
Okay.
And it was a double action Kellerman trigger, and it was just a hot mess because SIG was very well regarded and still is well regarded. But I did not care, and no one really cared for that gun that we had that for maybe 5 years and then moved to the P320, which I took out of the box cold and shot a perfect score with on our qual. So that speaks a lot to how good the P320 is. It had some issues as well. I think those have been resolved. At least I hope so, for the sake of my old coworkers, because they're still carrying it.
Right.
But yeah, I lost a little confidence in them when they mass produced that gun for the government, and it was just kind of okay. It had all sorts of issues, grip screws, and we had a guy who we're reasonably sure knows how to put his gun back together, have his slide come flying off in the middle of a qual. So,
oh no.
Yeah, that happened. Anyway, enough about that. Well, actually, let me ask you: are you an appendix carrier? I don't want to get you mugged, obviously, out on the mean streets of Central Mississippi. But are you appendix guy, strong side, inside, outside waist?
I am. I carry appendix in a tier 1 holster.
Nice. Yeah, it is the move. I've talked about this before, but I have such a hard time. Just the way my body's shaped, not just being fat, because being fat doesn't preclude you from carrying appendix. There's plenty of fat guys that pull it off. But my buddy Gabe New came up to me during the conference last year, and he's like, "Let me put hands on," and he kind of felt me around the midsection. And he's like, "Yeah, your body's not the way it's angled or whatever from years of wearing a duty belt and sitting on surveillance, I guess, maybe." So with that said, your incident happened about 4 or so years ago. So kind of walk us through where you were in life, who you were with, and what happened.
Sure thing. I was in the last year of college in Starkville, Mississippi. My wife and I, so she was my girlfriend at the time. And as you said at the beginning, we're married now, but we were finishing up our last year of school there at Mississippi State in Starkville. And I don't remember exactly what month it happened in. We had plans to go out for the night just to get some ice cream or something to eat. I can't remember the specific details. And I came from my townhouse, which was not very far away, to her apartment complex. And on the size of that, it's a very small apartment complex. And to my understanding, it's still there. But there's only a few units. There's 2 main buildings and maybe 8 units per building.
Okay.
And so everyone that was in the area, even though I didn't live there, I started to pay attention to who the neighbors were, what their habits were like. Obviously, spoke to them and got familiar with them. And same for my wife. And there never really was any sort of what you would think of as the college atmosphere or anything like that. That really wasn't what this apartment complex was like, which I preferred, and I was happy that was the case. There were actually several tenants of that complex that weren't college students. They were, middle-aged people that either had jobs in the area or worked at the university. And so I had just gotten there. Since at the time of the incident, I was 19 or 20, I wasn't legally allowed to carry at that point. And so I thought that as being an ASK viewer, if you can't keep your tools on you, my thought was to keep them as close as possible. So we were in transit a lot. And so I kept it in my truck, which obviously I don't do anymore. And at the time I left which was a P320 in my truck. And that was the gun that I was most familiar with. I only had 2 firearms at the time. And the other one was with my girlfriend and in her apartment. And it was a snub nose 38. Both of our thought processes after this incident has changed on what gun she should have and the operation of it and all of that. But that was what was there at the time. And I just arrived to her apartment. I'd sat down on the couch. I think she was getting ready in the back. And like when I say this happened as soon as I got there, I mean, I think I may have been tying my shoe or something. Right. Just walked in through the door. The door was unlocked. We were planning on leaving. I was just showing up to pick her up so we could go. And I heard someone running down the breezeway, the footsteps getting louder and louder, and stopped abruptly in front of the front door. And whoever it was, the individual started banging on the door, what I would describe as kind of like a boxer or an MMA fighter doing like a speed bag kind of thing.
Wow, okay.
Just like closed fists banging on the door. And then he switched to one fist banging on the door and the other one ringing the doorbell, very rapidly. And as I alluded to earlier, that type of instances or circumstances don't happen at this apartment complex. We don't know anybody or are friends with anybody that would do something like that. And so my thought went to that, and then to maybe it's, somebody playing a prank and they told him to go to the wrong house or something. That changed after the incident, but I immediately got up and was moving to the door to lock the door when the doorknob started to jiggle a little bit. He had stopped ringing the doorbell, but was still banging on the door and attempted to make entry into the apartment. Luckily, though, the doorknob is not like a rotating doorknob. It's the one with the latch. And so it's very sticky. And to someone who doesn't use the door very often, it feels like it's locked. And so I think that's what whoever it was thought was going on, that it was locked. And he didn't press down hard enough. And so it stopped as I was en route to the door. And so I locked it and looked through the peephole to see if there was anybody there. Nobody was there. It was dark at the time. And so I turned off all of the interior lights. After that, the light switch was right next to the door. And there's can lights on the exterior running under the breezeway. So I was going to hopefully try to identify who it was. And I grabbed a chair and moved it to the door to kind of, keep it from being a forced entry situation, and to step on the chair to look out the plate glass window at the very top of the door at an angle, not like just sticking my head up there and looking down. But nobody was there. I went to the back, and my alert level wasn't like all the way up because, it's a college town, maybe things like that happen. I'm still kind of in that maybe denial type of, sense or whatever. Went to the back, told Gracie what was going on, and I went to go grab the gun that was sitting on her counter just to be safe,
The 38.
Something, kept up. And she was like, "Do we need to call the police?" I'm like, not yet. I don't think so. And as I grabbed the gun, came back around the other side of the bed, and at the corner of the bed, there's a back door to the unit that was never used. It stayed locked. There's like interior blinds on it that were shut at the time. And I've heard y'all talk about on the podcast auditory exclusion and tunnel vision and things like that. And it wasn't like one of those situations, but it was almost like a hypervigilance kind of thing. I started hearing like small noises very well, and something drew my attention to the door, and I could see through the ambient light that the back doorknob started to rotate very slowly, that somebody was on the other side of the door trying to open the door. That door was different than the front door in that it was a actual knob. And so you couldn't lock the door knob. You could only do the deadbolt.
Sure.
And so the door was rotating. The knob was rotating. At that instant, everything kind of came together, and I knew that it wasn't really like a prank or, some other situation like that. Someone was trying to gain entry into the residence. And so I got on the phone with 911 at that time, took up a position on the other side of the bed. It's a 1-bedroom apartment, so everything's very small. There's really no sort of cover or concealment or anything that you can do there. It was the best option for me too, because Gracie at the time was in the bathroom area just off of the bedroom. And so I was on the phone with dispatch and got some units en route. The individual kept trying to open the door during that time, but it was very deliberate in that whoever it was trying to make as little noise as possible. And that's kind of, as I'm preparing for this, instance, I know that the door's dead bolted. I don't think that he can make entry into the apartment unless he kicks the door down. And so I'm kind of preparing my mind for that. And in that instance, what I would do, I made sure the gun was ready. I knew it was loaded, but the thoughts that were going through my mind were, if he does kick this door down and try to come in here, I really want more than 6 shots of 38. Sure. And I don't want to be using a snub nose revolver that I've fired maybe one time.
I get it.
Yeah, that was my first thought. Eventually, to kind of land the plane, he stopped messing with the doorknob. I could hear or see the police lights through the open windows and everything. And I don't remember if dispatch told me to come out unarmed. I just, because of what I knew, I was like, I probably shouldn't answer the door with a gun in my hand.
Right.
So I left the firearm on the counter. Went out and met the officers. They didn't come in. I don't know if code 3 is the right word. They didn't come in lights or sirens. I think it was just lights. And it was two officers. They came and met with me at the front door. I think total time for them to get there was, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 minutes. That was one of those things I really couldn't remember. But by that time, it had been kind of nice and quiet for a little while. I could tell that whoever it was wasn't there anymore. And they came, they searched the perimeter, went front and back with lights and everything. Didn't find anything, came back and let us know, that they didn't find anything. And they were like, all right, guys, have a good night. There's really nothing they could do at that point.
Right.
And so we left as quickly as possible and just went to my townhouse and just sat with my roommate and his girlfriend for a while and kind of talked about what had happened. And I think we may have proceeded from there, but ultimately that's about it. And of course, there's a lot of lessons to be learned in retrospect about everything that had happened. But that's generally the incident there.
Okay. I do have a question, which is, when he's at the back door and he or she or whoever, we have no idea, is slowly, deliberately trying to turn the knob and not make a lot of noise. So they were purposeful. Mm-hmm. That's not a good sign, by the way, if you're the person inside. Did right. you call out to the person at all? Did you say, hey, I've got a gun or anything like that?
No, I didn't at the time. My thought was, we were, I was probably 1.5 feet from the door by the time I saw that the knob was being rotated. The thought came to me, like, I wonder if I could just peek out the blinds and see who it is. But the blinds were internal, like in the glass. And so they have the little slides that you can move to either like raise the blinds completely or just kind of mimic the tilt of it. Mm-hmm. And I knew from experience that they're very gritty. And so it was going to be like, if I tried to open it, they would just open completely and I would be face to face with this person.
Right.
The thought, to be honest, to call out to them or to speak to them didn't come to me. And that's probably something that I could do. I could do better on, maybe if I could just, something like that could happen. But
yeah, I wouldn't say there's a right or wrong answer when it comes to that. I think it's situational. So I don't think you did a right or wrong thing necessarily by not calling out to them. I think you sort of, what's the word I'm looking for here? You denying that urge to look and see what it is you're looking at. If the person is not in your house and you can wait it out for the police to show up, I highly recommend that. Yeah. And wanting to look or wanting to see, maybe to help identify the person down the road, but you're better off staying where you are and with your firearm and hoping the police get there. As far as the police lights go, it's kind of an old tactic. You show up, turn the red and blues or just reds, whatever it is in Mississippi, on, and whoever starts running, that's your bad guy. Usually. So, you don't want to have, as a police officer, you don't want to have sirens coming to, you want to cut those at least a few blocks away to not give away your presence too soon. But that's just an internal cop thing, but I'm not sure if that's how they do it in Mississippi or not. So let's talk about the lessons here. You said it took you a little bit to realize, okay, this isn't a prank. This isn't, whatever. But I think in this case, I don't think that's a problem. I don't think you waited too long. I don't think you were in denial or had normalcy bias in this case, because there's a million reasons somebody could be pounding on your door. There could be a medical emergency. They could have had a car accident. They could be running from an abuser, or who knows? So the idea that you didn't immediately assume it was an intruder, I think is fine, because intruders don't generally bang on the door and ring the doorbell, right? Yeah. So, however, when the person is now at your back door quietly, the mental image I have of that, of the doorknob just barely moving and you're on the other side of it, like, oh, now I think it's a safe bet. And I think at that point you're, okay, this is clearly not any of those other things. This is something weird and nefarious and I need to call the cops. So let's talk about the lights. I think it was a great idea for you to kill the lights inside. What time was it? Was it dark at this point? outside?
Yeah, darkness had kind of set in at that point. It was probably 8:30 or so. It wasn't super late, but it was late enough that if you wanted to see, 12 feet and you were in the dark, you needed a light of some
Right.
kind. And that's one of the lessons I learned was I carry a flashlight with me now everywhere we go because at the time I maybe had the phone light, but I'm sure from personal experience that that light doesn't really go very far.
No,
And
it doesn't throw
um,
light very well.
yeah,
No, no,
but yeah, to answer your question, it was dark.
but to the point, I think killing the lights was something a lot of people wouldn't think to do. But if it's
Mhm.
dark outside and it's light inside, they can see and you can't see out. So,
Yeah.
good thinking on your part. Let's talk about gun selection. I think you were young. I'm not going to give you a hard time about it.
Yeah.
You were young, and this was, in fact, your extra gun. It was what you had to offer your girlfriend at the time for her protection. So there's, it is what it is. I think one of the things I try to pound home on the show is that people at gun stores and ranges and people are in the know should be accepting and not mocking or ridiculing to people who are new to firearms because that can turn people
Mhm.
off and feel like they're not welcome. And we believe
Yeah.
self-defense and the Second Amendment is for everybody. So if
Mhm.
you are that person at the gun store or whatever, and like I said, somebody calls it a clip instead of a magazine, is it the end of the world? I mean, you can
Right.
snicker to yourself, I guess, but or
Yeah.
just gently correct them, but don't point and laugh. So you're that young kid. You were 19 or 20. You were
Right.
relatively new, and you didn't know what you didn't know. And
Mhm.
it took this instance for you to realize, okay, well, this isn't really ideal, so we need to fix it. And
Yeah.
hopefully, people listening to this show or watching the channel will get a mental rep about, what are my tools? Are they
Mhm.
sufficient for the job?
Yeah.
Snubnose 38 could have very well done the job. It's not like
Yeah.
like it's not up to the task. It just depends on the other person and are they high on PCP? Do they have a gun of their
Right.
own? Whatever, but nothing. I won't throw any shade at snub nose revolvers. My grandfather had one.
Mhm. Yeah.
So what is your, if you don't mind me asking, giving up too much information about your personal
Mhm.
life, but what is your current setup? Like, I assume you guys are married, you live together. So both of you are able to get to a firearm and protect your home if you need to?
Yes, that's correct. So I do have the same P320 at the time. It's kind of like my bedside gun, but I normally just, since I carry my gun all the time and I carry the 365, it's on me pretty much all the time, unless I'm, like in the shower or, maybe cutting grass, but sometimes it is cut while I'm on the cutting the grass and everything. And so I'll just take it off and put it on the dresser right there. And so if I hear anything, I can just grab that first. For my wife, we finally found a gun that she was comfortable with and could operate well, and it was the Smith and Wesson Shield EZ in
Oh,
380.
okay.
And so she still isn't very comfortable carrying with a round in the chamber. And so, in order to retrieve her firearm and make it usable, she would have to charge the weapon. And she wasn't comfortable charging like any of my guns or anything like that. But the EZ was pretty easy for her to function. And she's got a bunch of range time behind it now, and she feels comfortable with it. So I'm happy for that. And so we both have access to firearms.
Yeah,
Um,
people will make fun of a 380 or even a 22. Look,
mhm.
if it's what you're able to fire effectively and get effective shots on a target,
Yeah.
it's literally better than nothing. You know what I mean? It's
Oh
like
yeah.
if it's 380 or no gun at all, I'm like 380 all day. If it's 22 or no gun, I'm 22 all day. Not that a 22 is a very effective fight stopper, but
Right.
it's literally better than nothing. As far as the empty chamber carry, I would encourage her or encourage you to encourage her to
Mhm.
get to that point where she feels comfortable with one in the chamber.
Yeah.
John Correa does a presentation about lessons learned from analyzing 11 bajillion gunfights that were caught on
Yeah.
videotape. And a big section of that is about that. And it's some of the clips he shows are very, very sad because you have a
Yeah.
self defender who, for whatever reason, can't, anything from your other arm is hurt and you haven't practiced how to, work the slide with your belt or your boot or whatever, to
Mhm.
just not enough, to literally not enough time. They have a gun in their face and
Yeah.
there's no possibility they're going to get that thing drawn and chambered in a timely fashion. So that's just me to you. Do with it whatever
Absolutely.
whatever you like. Um, let's see here. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about, you said it took 5 to 6 minutes, right, for the police to get there. That's a really good. That's an above average response time in the United States. And so other places, my buddy Logan works. He's a sergeant with the sheriff's department. He works in a place where his nearest backup is an hour away, and it's not a joke. It's an hour away. So that means potentially someone he's serving, a member of the public, calls. It could take him an hour to get to a place. Even rolling code 3. Code 3, by the way, is the right term. Most places, it's code 3 means lights and sirens.
Yeah.
Well, I say all that to say this: 5 minutes is a literal eternity. If you are fighting someone, especially fighting someone rolling around on the floor in your own home with a gun in play, or God forbid they're armed, 5 minutes, it's over. It's over in 30 seconds, potentially. If the person breaches the door, it's all done and said and done. And the police, who would love to be everywhere at once and protect all the people, can't do that. They can't be everywhere at once. And so all they can do is clean up the mess and file a report, and hopefully arrest somebody, but it's not gonna do you a lot of good. Was there anything about the story you wanted to mention that I may have forgot or overlooked? I don't want to miss anything.
No, the only other thing I can really think of was on me wanting to ID the guy. I knew that was not the greatest option, because you don't want to really be face to face with somebody. You're holding a gun and you don't know if they're armed or not.
Right.
I knew that was probably not the best situation. And to kind of make it full circle, I think potentially, my theory at least, was that it was some sort of diversionary kind of thing where you make a bunch of noise at the front door, have whoever's inside come to the front door and answer it and see what's going on while they make entry in the back.
Sure.
That was kind of my thought on that. Maybe again, I don't know. Hindsight's 20/20. But the other thing is, I really appreciate you guys preaching spiritual fitness. I talk to a lot of guys in my small group. We lead a small group of young married couples. And we had a weekend not that long ago where we got to go hang out, shoot a little bit, and talk a little bit about, obviously our relationship with the Lord and grow deeper in relationship with each other. But that was a topic that came up a lot, was, how do we carry? And some of the guys are in carry, some aren't, and what that looks like for them and their family. And so I really appreciate you guys doing that. And spiritual fitness is something that I put on the highest pedestal, because outside of everything, I know that if something were to go down, and I know if something were to happen to my wife, I know exactly where we would be going, and being ready to be that defender for my family and for the defense of others is something that you have to be ready long before that event happens. You can't really just throw it all together in the moment and be like, oh, I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready to go. And having that sense of understanding. And I think it was good for me to kind of start that at an early age and kind of get to where I am now. But other than that, spiritual fitness is key.
Well, our ethos is attitude, skills, plan. The spiritual fitness comes into the attitude part, because it's a place where you want to be mentally, where you don't leave anything unsaid, where you know the Lord. We let our Jesus flag fly really high. If you're not a Christian, you're still very welcome here. We love to have you. We're glad you're listening or watching. But we are all followers of Jesus, and as a result, that the way I live my life is such a way that no one will have to wonder where they stood with me. By the way, that's one way or another. It's not always good.
Right.
If you insist on being in my life and I don't care for you, you will also know that, for the record. But I don't leave anything unsaid, because you don't at that moment of truth is kind of a cliche, but it really is a moment of truth. As you are potentially bleeding out on the side of the road somewhere, you do not want your last thought to be, I wish I would have, or I wish I could have, or I wish I would have said this or not said this, or whatever the case may be. So I appreciate you bringing that up. For sure, folks, don't forget to stick around for the Gutowski Files, starring Stephen Gutowski, following this. And do me a favor, if you can, wherever you're listening to or watching this, if there's a way to rate it and review it, please do so. Give us 5 stars. Give us 6 stars if they let you, unless it's out of 10. Never mind. Just give us all the stars. And try to say something nice, would you? Eli, I thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate you. You have a wonderful rest of your day, sir.
Thank you. You too.
Well, alrighty, gang. Welcome back to the Gutowski Files. Once again, starring Stephen Gutowski, our intrepid reporter. He is the founder of TheReload.com and the host of the Weekly Reload podcast. Stephen, how are you, sir?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing?
Not too bad. I just got back from John Correa's house. We filmed a whole bunch of intros and mid rolls for the main channel badge cam videos, and had some delicious meals last night. It was a good time all the way around. Got to sit by the pool in the 118-degree heat.
Yeah, that's the one big downside of moving to Arizona, I suppose.
That's one of the few downsides. Yeah, it's pretty darn hot. Like, I'm not a roofer, so it's not the end of the world for me. I work in an air conditioned studio now, not out in the field carrying equipment and wearing a vest. But I don't miss that either. Just for the record. Speaking of the Weekly Reload podcast, who was on the Weekly Reload podcast, and I dare you to say her name properly without messing it up. Go.
Well, we had the researcher from Ohio State University who did the study that found a short gun safety video could help prevent children from handling firearms that they came across. And her name is Dr. Sophie Jadvik. At least that's how I'm going to pronounce it.
Very good.
Go over to the Reload and check out the video itself to see how she pronounces it, because I believe she's Norwegian. She's somewhere in Scandinavia there.
Sure. So I don't suppose the video
mix their consonants today.
Yeah, they're all consonants over there. Vowels are very expensive in Norway, for the record, and Finland. So I don't suppose the video in question has anything to do with Eddie Eagle, does it, by any chance? The NRA's child safety program?
We do talk about Eddie Eagle. They did not use Eddie Eagle for this study. They used a video that featured a police officer. There's actually the chief of police for Ohio State University's police department. And they actually found they believe at least that's more effective than something like Eddie Eagle, which uses a cartoon character, perhaps something that can be, useful down the line, to have this sort of study, and maybe more research is needed in that area. But, perhaps something the NRA, which does, as far as I'm aware, is the only national group that actually does something like what they're describing in the study with its Eddie Eagle program.
I haven't heard of any other.
They had a couple critiques, or at least areas for improvement that they thought, like, their video was very short and it featured a police officer in uniform, and they thought those were key aspects to it. So,
well, I think it's today's culture, especially short brevity is golden when talking to a small child. I think maybe it's worth looking into whether or not Eddie Eagle is better for like a 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old. And then above that age, perhaps an authority figure like a police officer might be a good back. Anyway, this week. Go ahead.
They studied 8 to 12-year-olds.
Okay. So we are discussing an article over at thereload.com written by Stephen Bull. The title is NYPD Gun Permit Approvals Crater Despite SCOTUS Ruling. SCOTUS ruling in question is, of course, the fairly recent Bruen decision. So tell us, Stephen, what's going on over there? I have a lot of thoughts. I just read the article before we started. So why don't you kind of walk us through what's going on?
Yeah, so there was a report from a publication called The City that looked at how frequently the New York Police Department was approving gun, both ownership and carry permits in the months after the Bruen ruling. So Bruen was June of 2022, and this looked at the time period from then through the end of the year, and it found that there was a huge drop-off in the number of permits that actually were approved during that time period. It went from, I believe, 56% being approved in 2021 down to 21% during this period of time that they looked at. So, and they also found that most of them weren't being denied; they were just being sat on, essentially, by the NYPD. So, pretty stark numbers there, and pretty interesting reaction to the Supreme Court's Bruen ruling.
Yes, I mean, you and I talked about this obviously beforehand, but I get the sense that people maybe within the city government or whoever is involved with the PD, with the permit and approval process, just appear to be slow walking these things. It's not like there hasn't been an uptick in denials, right? It's just they haven't gotten to as many. Is that, am I right?
That's what it seems to be. I don't know that they haven't gotten to them in this time period, right? I think it was my best guess, and this is just my analysis, my looking at what was going on during this time period, right? This was the last 6 months of 2022. And, technically they probably should have been issuing these permits, right? Because what was keeping them from issuing permits to most people in the city who would apply for them, or at least most people who want them. A lot of people just wouldn't apply, right? Because they knew they weren't going to get approved because of how the old system worked, where it was based on this good reason clause. It was completely subjective, and New York City officials obviously don't really want people to be able to carry guns legally. And so there was no, and it was a very expensive process, of course, too. So it was kind of a waste of money to go and apply for most people. But after Bruen, they got rid of that subjective part of this law, which means that they should have just been going through the normal process of checking to see if the person had completed the training that's required and made it through the background check, and then issuing the permit. But it seems like perhaps what NYPD officials did instead was wait for the state to go and pass the new law that they ended up passing after Bruen, because it took a little while. And not in, in legislative terms, it was pretty fast, but it did take several months before the state passed a new law that severely restricted where you can carry a gun, that added some new requirements on who can qualify for a permit. That really kind of that was a response to the Bruen ruling. We call these Bruen response laws. You've seen them in a couple places: New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Hawaii, California.
The usual suspects,
yeah. Either considering them or have already passed them. And so it does fit in the timeline, at least, that NYPD was told you can't use the good reason clause to deny people anymore, which meant they probably had a lot of applicants who rushed in to apply, who would have passed and gotten these permits if they hadn't slow walked them. But they maybe wanted to wait until this new law was in place from the state before they actually did that.
Are you aware of any organization, the NRA or any other group, that is perhaps, I think one of the ways to combat this is to file a suit and say, hey, they need to come up with an actual time frame, something that can be measured, so that I turn my application in, July 1st. They have until, September 1st to have it done and adjudicated one way or the other. Is anyone, as far as you know, is anyone trying to do that?
Well, there's actually a state law that says they have to issue these permits within 3 months, and they just sort of ignored that. That's actually not a totally uncommon thing to see. Philadelphia has done that in the past, down in Pennsylvania. It can often take litigation to make those sort of state deadlines applicable. And so, obviously there's the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, which is the group, they're an NRA affiliate that won the Bruen case. And there have been several lawsuits since this Bruen response law was passed, from groups like the Gun Owners of America, which actually probably going to be implicated, those cases, in what's going on with these permit application processes in New York City. Because, if the Supreme Court hands down a ruling and says, you can't do this anymore, you got to issue these permits on a objective basis in a timely fashion, and then the city turns around and says, no thanks, we're just not going to issue permits, right, then it's probably going to get them into trouble in court with these new cases. And several justices, as we've talked about on the show before, probably it was a while back now, but have already expressed interest in at least shown that they're closely watching these cases in New York that deal with how the state is handling the gun carry regulation in the wake of Bruen. So, I think it's probably going to be something that comes up in a future Supreme Court case.
So real quick, walk us through how this came to light, because New York didn't just release a report saying we're slow walking our stuff. So there was a criminal case involved here, and the attorney for the defendant is the one who did the FOIA request. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's right. There's a man named Dexter Taylor, who was a New York City resident, who had his home raided, and NYPD found several guns, 4 rifles, 5 handguns, apparently homemade gun making parts and materials, a 3D printer, things like that. And so he owned these firearms. The accusation is, at least, and they weren't weren't registered. He wasn't licensed in the city to have these guns, because in New York City you also need a license just to own firearms.
Yeah, don't get me started.
To own handguns. And so he didn't have that. He's being charged with violating, the city's laws on that point. And his lawyer in the case is the one who actually filed a Freedom of Information request to get these records, and then turn them over to the publication, The City, which is the group that did the first, they broke this story essentially. And so, yeah, it's interesting because the argument from Taylor's lawyer is basically that even though now Taylor never applied for the gun permits, but the argument is that it doesn't matter that he didn't apply because the process is unconstitutional, because it's arbitrary and it's onerous. It takes too long, and the city doesn't do a good job of following the processes that it's required to follow. So the argument in the case is that the city's permitting process violates the Second Amendment. And that's where you could see something like this, a criminal case, end up back at the Supreme Court as well.
I'd love to see a Supreme Court case that could just get rid of all of these. May it please the crown that I buy a gun. That nonsense is, I can't imagine how that has not been determined to be in direct violation of the Second Amendment. Just ask permission to purchase a gun, and otherwise, sane, non-criminal, a person who's not prohibited in any other legal way. Why do they have to ask permission to buy a gun? That seems preposterous to me. Is it anything like that coming down the pike, or is that just going to remain unaddressed for now?
No, I mean, if you look at Bruen and you look at the concurrence from Kavanaugh and Roberts, who were, two of the conservative justices on the court, so they're two of the 6 who were in the majority in Bruen, they wrote a concurrence that said essentially you can have permitting processes for concealed carry, right? You can require permits as long as they aren't subjective in nature, right? As long as they're what we call shall issue permits, where the person completes the background check, they go through the training that's required, they complete that, and they get the permit. They can't be denied on subjective grounds. And so additionally, the court's putting gun carry on the same level as gun ownership in Bruen. And, this is kind of a reading the tea leaves things, but if the court is now saying that gun ownership and gun carry are on the same level of rights, and you have 2 conservative justices very likely to be joined by the 3 liberal justices in saying that permitting that is sufficiently objective and processed in a reasonable time frame is acceptable for gun carry, then it's likely to be acceptable for gun ownership as well. We don't know that specifically because the court has not actually addressed that question directly, but it's sort of, reading where they've come down to this point would perhaps get you to that conclusion. Although, again, a big part of that concurrence is them saying, you can have these basic permitting schemes, but they can't be absurd. They can't be unreasonably long. They can't be designed to try and make it so that your average law-abiding person can't actually get through the process. And that's where you could see perhaps a challenge like in this case with Taylor, where they argue the city's permitting process itself is as applied, right? That's a type of shit. You can either challenge something on its face, like the law itself is unconstitutional, or you can challenge it as it's applied to a specific person. And in this case, perhaps there would be a reasonable as applied challenge here where it says, yeah, this law might be constitutional. You might be able to do permitting this way, but if you look at how they did it in this case, that was not constitutional.
Agreed. Okay, so folks, that is our time for this week. Do me a favor. I say this every week and it bears repeating. Go over to thereload.com. That's thereload.com. Carefully consider getting a membership. Listen, there was no other website, no other publication for us to partner with to do this, because no one else is doing what Stephen does. No one else is in this exact lane. And break stories like this. Has anyone else released a story about this to your knowledge, Stephen? This case we talked about today?
I'm not sure. I mean, obviously the city, it's the paper of the city. It's confusing to say. The publication that originally broke the story did a great job on there. Another small publication up in New York. They don't focus specifically on anything else, just this one story.
Yeah.
Other than that, I don't think I've seen it.
So go to thereload.com and carefully consider getting membership. Stephen relies on his membership dues to fund his important work, and I say it every week. And something else that happens every week at the end of the show, we're going to beat this to death, aren't we? Is it Stephen gets the last word? Stephen, I'll see you next week.
Absolutely.